Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a philosophy that was really born from crisis, existentialism. We're going to look at it through the lens of Sidney Finkelstein's analysis and see how the total collapse of faith in progress forced thinkers to ask a pretty terrifying question. What if we're all completely on our own? So, Finkelstein argues that existentialism basically forces us to look in the mirror and ask something deeply unsettling. Is this whole idea of human progress just a story we tell ourselves? To even understand how a doubt that big could take root, we've got to rewind to a time of, well, almost unbreakable optimism.
You see, before this rebellion, there was this incredible promise. Existentialism didn't just pop up out of thin air. It was a direct reaction against a worldview that was absolutely certain about the future. So let's take a look at the age it was pushing back against, the Enlightenment.
This quote right here from the American Declaration of Independence, it just perfectly nails the spirit of the 18th century. The core belief was that reason and science, what they called the laws of nature, were the keys to unlocking a better world for everybody. Your own personal happiness wasn't some separate thing. It was supposed to grow right alongside the progress of society. But, even in this age of reason, you could hear these whispers of a much darker view. While society was looking outward, all full of hope, you had thinkers like Blaise Pascal who were turning inward. They weren't focused on social progress. They were looking at really personal anxieties, like how our pleasures are just vanity, our evils feel infinite, and of course, the big one, death, which is always right there. This contrast, it really set the stage for a huge philosophical showdown. Well, those early whispers of doubt, they pretty soon grew into a roar. The 19th century came crashing in, and all those shiny promises of the Enlightenment collided with the grim, messy reality of a new industrial world. Finkelstein's analysis, it paints a really bleak picture here. This new world wasn't some rational paradise. No, it was a brutal battleground of competition. Human creativity, art, even your relationships, they all got flattened into commodities, things to be bought and sold. That whole promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness was basically replaced by what Marx would famously call naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. This quote just perfectly captures that feeling of vertigo, right? The old certainties, things like religion, tradition, your community, they were literally melting into air. It was like the ground beneath everyone's feet was just gone. And in this new, chaotic reality, people were forced to face their real conditions of life without any of the old comforting illusions to hide behind. So, when you're facing a crisis like that, where do you even look for answers? Finkelstein lays out two major and completely opposite paths that grow out of all this despair. Okay, so on one side, you've got Soren Kierkegaard. He represents the inward turn. For him, the answer is inside the individual soul. It's all about subjective experience and faith. Then, on the complete other side, you've got Karl Marx. He represents the outward turn. He believed the answer was out there, in objectively analyzing the scientific and social forces that were shaping the world. Kierkegaard looked at the outside world and just saw chaos, something absurd. So for him, trying to find some objective truth out there was a total fool's errand. The only truth that actually mattered was subjective, the kind you find inside yourself. It was about a passionate leap of faith. This idea that if you hold on to something with the most passionate part of your being, that becomes your truth. Now, Marx saw the exact same world and came to the exact opposite conclusion. For him, truth wasn't subjective at all. It was brutally objective. It was all about understanding the material forces driving society, like the cold, hard logic of cash payment that had pretty much replaced every other kind of human connection. And this all led to two totally different ideas of what it means to be free. For Kierkegaard, freedom was a purely internal act of rebellion. It meant standing in front of that stone wall of science and society's rules and saying, nope, you don't define me. Real freedom was a mental act of defiance. Marx and Engels, they argued the complete opposite. To them, freedom wasn't about ignoring that stone wall. It was about understanding how the wall was built in the first place. True freedom was about gaining knowledge of how nature and society work so that you can actually master them and ultimately change the world. Now, this whole philosophical showdown wasn't just happening in stuffy academic books. No way. It was echoing really powerfully in the work of artists and writers who are wrestling with the exact same feelings of crisis and disillusionment. I mean, just take the novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky. his characters are constantly raging against this very same stone wall of cold, rational, unfeeling laws that seem to run the universe. It's really the perfect literary expression of that existentialist cry against a world that feels completely indifferent to human passion and will. But Finkelstein argues that for Dostoevsky, it didn't just stop at rebellion. He looked at the chaos in 19th century Russia, all the poverty, the rise of radical ideas like socialism, and he basically concluded that the answer wasn't just individual defiance. No, it was a kind of collective healing through religious faith. For him, faith was a social solution, not just a personal escape. And then came Friedrich Nietzsche, who took this whole crisis to its most terrifying and logical conclusion. When he declared God is dead, he wasn't just talking about religion. He was announcing the death of the entire foundation for Western meaning, morality, and purpose. And that path leaves humanity totally alone, with the terrifying but also liberating job of creating its own values from scratch.
Nietzsche saw this constant battle going on inside the human soul. The fundamental truth of life, he said, is Dionysian. It's that chaotic, passionate, instinctive, and often tragic force of nature. But we can't live in that raw chaos all the time, so we create what he called an Apollonian dream world, the world of reason, order, beauty, and art. It's a beautiful and totally necessary illusion that helps shield us from the terrifying truth of it all.
Okay, so let's pull all these different threads together. What exactly defines this existentialist worldview, according to Finkelstein's historical breakdown? So what are the common threads Finkelstein pulls out? Well, it's a worldview that tends to see the material world as fundamentally absurd. It dismisses science as kind of useless for solving our deepest, most real problems. It defines freedom not as being part of society, but as being separate from it. And running through it all is this deep, deep disillusionment with the whole idea of human progress. And this brings us to Finkelstein's main point, the big takeaway from this whole analysis. This is really crucial. Existentialism isn't some collection of abstract, timeless truths about what it means to be human. Not at all. It is a direct, historical response to a whole series of real-world crises. You can think of it as a philosophical cry that echoes all the way from the factories of the Industrial Revolution to the trenches of the World Wars. And so, Finkelstein's analysis leaves us with a question that echoes from the 19th century right into our world today. When everything feels unstable and the idea of progress seems shaky, where do we turn for answers? Do we look inward for our own subjective truth, or do we look outward to try and understand the forces that are shaping our world? That choice might be more urgent now than ever before.